Today we want to do a little bit of group therapy, digging into the evolution of a project that came to life by the name of Space Probe Force, short SPF. Because it took quite some interesting turns during development, and I think it taught us a lot. Let's start at the very beginning, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about when you came up with the idea, where and when, and what was the situation like?
I think we've been around, 6 years into our journey after we founded the company. We did lots of commercials back in the day, a lot of client work. This was, I think, the first time that a real frustration creeped into all of us. We have this background of coming from short films, right, doing our work. After a handful of years of just doing work for others, we started getting pretty frustrated by that. This coincidence with the emergence of Netflix and the big streamers, right? And this was pretty golden times in animation. And also started back then original animation. This then led to me thinking about, okay, we can also do this. We can create original animation.
So what year was that? 2015 or something?
Something like that, 15 or 16. Not sure about it.
What was at the center of the idea you had? What was the initial spark that kind of kicked off what you were developing there?
I would say that's kind of two things. First of all, saying okay, how can we make money with animation in a different way? That is, and then as Ilija said before, with the advent of the streamers, we thought now there's a new platform for animation. And we actually wanted to do something that is real animation. Of course, we do animated commercials, but that's not the classic storytelling, character-based approach. And for me, I love old cartoon animation because it's such a physical comedy. It is about motion. It's really the heart of animation. You use motion and characters to tell something exciting. Let's make something that has this craziness of cartoons where you basically tell a short story and it's fast paced and it makes you laugh, and maybe we can inject that with a little bit more meaning. So this was basically the beginning of that.
There was already a component of we have to think about how can we make this work in a commercial context.
Absolutely.
It's classical roles you probably took on there, as you said, being a producer and then Tom being a creative. So yeah, I know Tom's process is extremely intuitive, right? I don't think he thinks too much before he starts drawing, right? It's just it comes out of you. There's a certain theme to this series, to SPF. How did that develop? Did that just come naturally, or was it something where you were looking for a context that you thought could be a good place for everything to take part in?
I love science fiction, and basically what I draw are characters, and in a way you can say they're all alien because they are basically just weird characters. And some of them you look and you see okay, it tells a story because it has some inherent features where you already see what's that thing gonna do, or what the life circumstances of that character must be. We came up with the space theme because we said okay, if we want to tell infinite stories with those weird different characters, in what setting can we put them? It's not one ecosystem where everything follows rules. No, we have these astronauts that go out into space, and every episode they come to a new planet and they meet aliens. And the inherent part of that was what I also love about science fiction in general. Science fiction sometimes takes a human principle of society or development and puts it to the max in a situation that is not our planet Earth, to basically shine a light or mirror the absurdity of human existence. If I think about Douglas Adams, where you go to a planet and it's all bureaucrats and they like to write poems, but because they are bureaucrats, nobody can listen to those poems, and they like to write 4-hour poems, and it makes people actually puke. So this kind of satirical approach where you take a human principle and you basically magnify it through a different type of character. this was the guiding principle there. So.
So you already mentioned Douglas Adams. What, like, are there any other role models? Like, when you think back, like, what's the stuff you always had on your mind when you were starting to develop this?
When I discovered Terry Pratchett, I spent all of my pocket money to buy all the books, and I'm still a big fan of Terry Pratchett, and I think he does it masterfully. He created his own universe, the Discworld, with some weird rules in there, but basically, in the beginning, not so much, but when he found his style, he said, like, okay, in this book, I'm writing in my world about the absurdity of television, or the absurdity of that we have a postal system, or he writes about the police by taking the night watch. And this was for me so interesting because, first of all, a brilliant writer, and I laughed a lot while reading, which doesn't happen a lot. And for me, that was absolutely fascinating because it was so absurd, but also so plausible, because you were shown human nature, and you connect immediately because what he describes over the top is something you have experienced in your life, right? In some form or another.
And then I think the other big inspiration you always had, like more or less in terms of storytelling, but more in animation style, was always Ren and Stimpy for this one, right? Like was a big one we talked a lot about.
Ren and Stimpy, definitely, with the weirdness and sort of the disgusting parts of it. Yeah. But I would also say, like, classic stuff like Roadrunner and Bugs Bunny have all these elements in there. And one thing that I think played a big role when we were studying, some French students made this film Burning Safari, which I still think is one of the most brilliant pieces of fast-paced slapstick animation ever made. And maybe the wish was there that, can I create something like this too?
There's this whole layer of these three astronauts, the characters that kind of guide us, or were supposed to guide us through the universe. Was this there from the beginning, or is this something that you came up with at some point because you felt you would need something like this?
One of the very first drawings Tom made on that concept is actually a drawing of an astronaut, of Flip. So I think it was there from the very beginning, that we need those characters to for the audience to identify with in a certain way. I think it also came from that, like, okay, we need characters that show consistency, that the audience can connect to them. So I think it always, like, the astronauts have been there from the beginning, I think.
Cool.
Absolutely. I mean, we knew characters. We said, like, okay, they're not living in one ecosystem. We're going out into the universe. What do we need to take us along? So said we have this organization that is, like, horribly underfunded, and the people in there, basically all of them are idiots, right? So well-meaning idiots, but they go out and they visit these worlds with a dubious purpose of documenting for documenting's sake, and then somehow they disturb that ecosystem and they create chaos.
Also, this is where the name of the original concept is coming from, right? Like, so Space Probe Force is the name of the organization that the astronauts are working for. So it has absolutely been at the center of the concept there from the beginning. Yeah.
It was also, like, thinking about some mechanisms of animation, having these astronauts and basically playing with how you can repeat imagery a couple of times and then break it. So the idea was, every time the show starts, a little bit like the Simpsons sofa, right? It starts every time with the same sequence, and after the fourth time, you can do something hilarious with it. So basically, you have the element of repetition in there. And if you don't have a fixed crew, if you would just, like, go out and say, like, okay, let's do a nature documentary with a narrator that you don't see, right? You just have an objective view on something. That was not kind of enough, because the tapestry of this group where you could play with those principles, create surprises by repetition, and then breaking it.
So there was some feedback that came in from within the group, right? Like Woodblock, and then also more specifically, like the Polynoid crew, like the Woodblock founders. And then there was also feedback that came in from more of an industry context that was, like, a little bit more technical and, about, like, formats and stuff. And since we're doing group therapy today, let's start with the internal stuff first.
People were surprised by that, and we were looking for ways to get away from the frustration of the commercial world. And I think part of it is like just plain old ego, right? Why am I supposed to do this? I have other ideas, or I want to do other stuff. So that created that friction. On the other hand, it was also immediately analyzing, because we realized that this IP market is complicated. We didn't have a lot of experience with that. All these things then started to kind of twist the project a little bit in terms of, okay, we need to inject something that is not inherent in the original concept, that will make it viable on the market, because we have to target the audience, but we target the people who are potentially the buyers of this. I think these thoughts, because it was a big investment at that time, we couldn't just shell out the money and say like, let's start a full-fledged production. It was kind of on the side, but it still used up a lot of resources. So the thought was there, how can we ensure beyond the creative with mechanisms of selling a series to a third party? How can we ensure that this will find a market?
And then like on the other hand, like all the industry related stuff, right? Because you talked to a lot of people back then, you know, showing your idea and getting some feedback. How did that feel? Like, what was that about?
It was really a phase of intense learning of how does this world, like, so we specifically looked at episodical things, right? So series, we ignored film for that moment. And so it was, okay, the years before we understood the advertisement market, learned that, and now we started looking, okay, how does this other market of serialized animation work, which was already in that phase. It was in a bigger transition, right? So traditionally it is like broadcasters, like state-funded broadcasters that brought animation. Then Netflix and the streamers came. At the same time, YouTube started rising, right? So there was already a big shift in that business. When we presented the project to broadcasters and everything, right? We got good feedback on everything. Everybody loved the design. Everybody loved the quality, the characters. Like feedback was always super positive. But we learned a couple of super simple things, like, so the first question everybody asks is like, okay, what's the target audience? We want everything to be for adults because like we want to tell grown-up humor and stories. But then like if a broadcaster sees what we are doing with Facebook Force, right, they cannot make that connect. Okay, this is cute and funny characters. How can this be for adults, right? So this is such a wide gap that was between that of course we tried, okay, now in the pitch, if we do the next pitch with the same project, how are we adjusting that? So we wrote pitch decks that were for kids, we wrote pitch decks that were for adults. And so those kind of things. And this is just one example, right, of all the things that this external world tried to see in that concept. And we didn't even know that they are like, that those are the things they're looking for.
Our takeaway was, if we want to go into that market, we have to kind of bend ourselves to that and say like, okay, what they are looking for, we have to adjust our concept in a way to what they are looking for to actually have any opportunity there. And this was one of the biggest things. And it was also internally in the head of other people, that you have to kind of create a construct that works for the market, like the market demands it in that moment, right? Instead of just saying like, okay, we're making something super cool that people want to see.
Mm-hmm. This of course had the craziest consequences for Facebook Force, right? Because like as once we learned that, every concept we developed afterwards, we already knew we have to give this answer. But for Facebook Force, since it was the first one, it had of course like it started to have this touch of butchering the concept in a way, right? Because we came up with something where we didn't think about that. And then we had to apply those aspects to it. So that is where things turned weird, right? Because we had to like write all those different variations of it that strayed away from what it was originally.
So it led to like some kind of identity crisis, right? No one knew like, what is it? What is it about? Like, for who is it? So what happened then? Because like it definitely was like kind of chaos, right? I think like no one knew where do we want to go. There was a lot of stuff that was happening, right? Like complete shifts from what it was like originally meant to be. Tell us about like what came to life, like what kind of paths we're trying to go with this.
So in the beginning, when we learned like, okay, we're not going to sell something like this to an adult audience. And then we thought like, okay, look at some examples out there, how The Simpsons is perceived by many as a children's cartoon. And then those people actually don't watch it. But if you watch it as an adult, you find that second layer in there that is really subversive and says something about society. And this is something that the children's, it doesn't take away of the fun from the children watching it, but it gives you that extra layer where you as an adult can appreciate the good aspects from this. But as we continue talking to buyers, it became clear within the cartoon thing, they are basically looking to children and maybe the lower segment of young adults in a way. And then suddenly there was that thought of saying like, okay, but to make this viable, we just don't want to create random chaos. We have to give something to the children. Then that educational aspect came in there. Okay, we're going out there. How can we inject something that where let's say the parents say like, oh, this has value for my kids. I think that was the first big path that we took that strayed really away from this. It went from parody and satirical to something quite forced for children that should be funny, but had this extra layer of, we inject artificial value in there somehow.
On top of it, we already had learned a certain thing, and it is like from broadcasters, even if all of them have been super interested in what we do because they love it and the high quality work we do, nobody has the money to actually pay for that, right? Like to do the high quality ambitions we have, this money is not there in the broadcasting world. So at the same time, we already understood, okay, maybe it's not even possible to get that kind of money from them. So this is then when we started also thinking about it a bit more zoomed out in context of, can we create our own IP, right? So can we publish ourselves? And then we even went right in things like, okay, let's do a game of this. Let's do a coloring book. So we not only the trading cards, exactly. From a creative perspective, it was now convoluted, but also from, okay, we went from, okay, somebody will pay us to make a cartoon series. We went to know we have to do this ourselves.
Looking back and comparing it to what's going now with the AI craze, back then it was all cross-media stuff, right? How do you break out of your own media part and inject that into web and whatever? And this is, we heard that so many times when talking to potential buyers that they're looking for like a complete package. And then we kind of, because we felt like, okay, is it a hit or miss? If everybody loves it, why doesn't nobody say like, let's do it, right? What are we doing wrong? Is the package too small? Do we need to expand more? So it was kind of scrambling into all directions to create something that would steer the appetite a bit more of somebody that would potentially finance this.
The most labor went into creating a 3.5 minutes piece of film. What was the process there? Where did the script come from? What was the idea behind it? All the stuff that, all the feedback, the input you got is this film like a result of everything? We can already state that when there went a lot of work into this film, but no one really knew what he was doing besides creating like insane production quality, right?
Since we're doing therapy, right, maybe we can unravel that together a little bit, because it is pretty wild why and how we produce this film, right? We have this amazing concept where we know we can tell the stories with those characters, visit all those planets, right? But to create something, you need to write a script, right? And it's very hard to write a script for physical comedy. How do you write a script for physical comedy? I think we still don't know. So we tried so many different things, right? Like everybody got to take a take. I mean, we even wrote like with Moritz, right? We wrote 10-minute scripts.
When he came back with his 10-minute script, well, suddenly it had this full on Hollywood emotional arcs of the characters. I read it and I said like, has absolutely nothing to do with these characters. They're idiots and you're not supposed to like them. You're supposed to laugh about them and laugh with them and enjoy the chaos. Then 3.5 minute animation. I still think it should not have been longer than 90 seconds and be so much fast paced in and out, and you have a good time and not necessarily lingers with you because you got shown something that you have to think about.
It's hard to reconstruct how things came together, but it's pretty easy to agree that you guys like you were excited about the initial idea, then there were like all kinds of people who had an opinion about it and thought it had to be different. And then, there were like different things created, like again, like trading cards. There's this game, coloring books, whatever. And so Gravity pushed this piece of film. It was finished, and then, we kind of like put it into a drawer for, I don't know, 5 years, because no one, like, I know we are like every year we had this discussion about like, what is it? Like, can we publish it? And if we do, like, what do we tell people what it is?
That's the interesting thing about the film, right? It is amazing high quality animation. It looks fantastic, right? It looks like could be a piece out of a Pixar film, like just from the pure like artistic perspective in terms of production quality and everything, right? But exactly as you said, there was no clarity about like, okay, what are we publishing there? Then even like there were voices from internal, right? This is not good enough. And then what does it mean not good enough, right? And then, okay, from a storytelling or from a IP or consistency perspective or whatever it is, we can clearly, all of us agreed, okay, this is a very bad pilot episode for that universe. And this was the base of like, okay, we don't know what to do with it, right? And that's why it went into the drawer.
During the production of it, there were so many changes coming in and going back and forth that completely like diluted the whole basic premise of it. And the script, then it sounded good on paper, but then when we saw it in images and like, nobody's going to understand this because how with it doesn't have dialogue, right? How you tell a little bit more complex story just with silence and physical comedy in motion. I think back about it, it was like there was so many input coming from so many sides that it was not possible to write a finished script because somebody would have again said like something missing or it's too long or it's this and that, and just not not committing to a certain thing, just leaving it all over the place.
So off to one of my favorite topics. What are the takeaways from this adventure?
For me, it's a very straightforward one. One has to make mistakes, and they are very important on the journey.
Good answer, for sure. But so what would you have, like, if you could like restart, like with all the mistakes you made and all the stuff you learned, what would you do differently?
Looking back in terms of like, if we would have done back in the days, if we would have done this right, then this would have led to something else, because it's not, life is not working that way. It is like, okay, this happened for a reason back in that because of all the things we learned from it. Now we also finding closure for that and closing it, right? So that's all. If we would now restart and do something like that again, which are things we're doing, right? Now we would have, of course, do everything completely different because of all the things we learned. It's all about the core creative idea, and you cannot stray away from that or like form it in a way so it makes people happy or makes buyers happy. Everything needs to be about the original core creative idea, right? Like that is the obvious learning I have to take from that.
I would approach it differently in a way that instead of producing 3.5 minutes of animation, it would have been basically creating a couple more or a couple small story snippets that basically are a proof of concept that this will live through its animation and the physical comedy of it, right? Yeah, basically create a 20-second clip that shows you what is supposed to be without explanation needed.
I think globally the learning is, and I can finally say it, just trust your intuition, right? Because if you would always have trusted your instincts and, you would have been bold enough to not listen to everyone else out there, I think time proved that you could have been right. Because, when you look at all the technical stuff, how do formats have to work? I think that dramatically changed in the last couple of years, right? There's like, you can put content out in pretty much any format, as long as it suits your content. The same goes for audience as well, right? So I think all technical stuff maybe it was just visionary to try something different. And then if you would have stick to the original idea and remind yourself what it was really about, try to create something that's really for you, that you would enjoy.
I think it's really interesting that you say how the parameters changed, right? When we were doing this, it was really like, okay, there are certain formats out there. So you either have to do like a 10-minute format, or then you can do a 15-minute format. And as you said, that has completely changed. And in our world today, maybe it's even more interesting if you don't get the same amount of piece every time.
When we trust our intuition, it almost always works, but it is a long journey to come to that point of confidence where we really purely trust it, right? And if we look back, if we would have trusted it more on our journey, we would already be in a completely different place, right? But that doesn't matter because that is the journey. So, but this is the one thing we need to do and learn more and more and going forward, right?
Funny is that that process for me makes me wonder if I can trust my intuition, because the initial feedback was, this is great, let's make something great out of it. And then the whole journey we just talked about happened. And of course, as a creator, sometimes in between, I'm thinking like, could that have been anything at all? Or was it bullshit to begin with, right? A little bit of doubt in your own capabilities, imposter syndrome, all of that goes in there. And since it was a long process and a lot of people we put a lot of work into there, it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to say like, okay, well, the intuition was right, but that's a very personal thing when I think about how that whole journey went. And and that's why we talk about it as therapy right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the main aspects, which was also, I think, the first aspect of the core idea that got completely lost in the process, is the role of humans in this universe, right? Because as you said, Tom, it was always meant as a parody on human behavior, and which is kind of an unlimited source for content, because humanity is just like endlessly stupid.
Yeah, I think my initial drawings, if you look at some alien drawings, it's there are no humans around. Basically, the most interesting drawings are these things where you have that alien that takes an aspect of humanity, absurd, weird, whatever, and you put that you incarnate this in a character in its own world.
The astronauts don't matter that much. It's really about using the aliens to comment on human behavior. And I'm very happy that we are trying to bring that to life. So I think it's a great thing that stays at the core.
So with this like rediscovered main topic, how do you see that in context of Woodblock originals?
It is a perfect format for how the media world works these days, right? And we already knew it a couple of years ago, but we got distracted from everything that we already talked about. But it is still a perfect format for how the world works. And I'm still convinced you can build a great audience around it. So this is that one aspect why it helps amazing as a Woodblock original. But then the second perspective is, or the second point is, that it has perspective, right? It has our own viewing point that only we can have, or in this case, if we talk about singular creative vision, right, that only Tom can have. And I mean, like since we got to know you, right, like we're always looking for that. Okay, how can we extract that magic that's only in your head and present it to an audience, basically, right? And this is the perfect format for it. So I still have a feeling like, we are sitting on gold here.
If I break down what we are doing with our short films and stuff, all of them are a comment, and some are about nature and technology, but this is basically, it's the present human condition, and all of our stuff is basically looking at aspects of humanity and commenting about it in a direct or in a more like philosophical or metaphorical way.
Great answers.